Welcome students to Mr. Stevens' video on using the participle phrase to combine two sentences into one. This video is one in a series of videos that will show you how to use phrases and clauses to take multiple ideas, multiple sentences, combine them into one sentence in order to enhance your syntactic variety and to improve the clarity and coherence of your written work. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want you to look at is the definition of a participle, and this would be a definition that you would see in a grammar book or in a dictionary. Typically when students look at definitions like this, they get a little confused. The verbiage is such that it's not always the most descriptive or explanatory, so to help you out, I've broken down that definition into three different parts here. The first thing you need to know to understand participles is that they are descriptors, right? Adjectives that have been made of actions or verbs. So we take these verbs, these actions, and we turn them into adjectives. That's one of the key ideas to understand about participles. Another thing to understand about participles is that they typically refer to the actor or the subject's participation in an action rather than the action itself. Now this is a little confusing, and my hope is that once you've completed this video, that you go back and maybe return to these definitions to just kind of check your understanding. And I think once we've been through the video, we've worked through some examples, we take our little mini quiz at the end, you're going to come back to this definition, it's going to make a lot more sense. Okay? Lastly, something that we need to consider with participles is what they tell our audience. I mean, language, after all, is the way in which we give thinking ideas to someone else. Right? So language as such is laid out in such a way that it tells our audience how to read the words on the page. So the participle tells our audience what kind and which one. Okay, so as we're looking through our examples, keep in mind, you need to be asking the question, is it telling me what kind or which one? And I think you'll find as we look at our participle phrases today that they do indeed answer those questions about the nouns they modify. All right, we're going to be talking about two different kinds of participles today, and one's really simple. The other one is mostly simple, but sometimes can be a little bit difficult depending on the type of verb. The first one we're going to look at is the PRPP. That's the jargon that we're going to be using in class for the present participle phrase. And the present participle phrase is when you take a verb and you make it into a participle by adding ing. Okay? So play becomes playing. Eat becomes eating. Right? Talk becomes talking. So on and so forth. Pretty simple. Okay? We'll get to how the phrase works in a minute, but for right now, just keep in mind that the present participle is the verb plus ing. Okay? The past participle is the verb, typically, is the verb with an D or ED. Okay? Typically. However, the English language being a very diverse and interesting language, we have these wonderful things called irregular verbs that are not conjugated like your normal, everyday verbs, right? Think of them as the outsider verbs, the ones that don't hang out with anybody else. They don't like to socialize. Irregular, okay? The weirdos. So with those verbs, you have different endings. Whereas most verbs, D and ED, irregular verbs, end with, you have the list right here on the screen, ENT, N, NE, so on and so forth. And of course you've got the tenses down there at the bottom, the past participle forms of these verbs. Something to note about the past participle, if you're thinking about verb conjugations, the past participle in conjugation is used with the past perfect tense. Now again, this is side information, not necessary to understand. I'm just giving you grammarians out there kind of a nod as to how this works. It's not the simple past, right? You look at eaten, for example. The simple past form of eat is ate. I ate a sandwich, right? The past participle is used with the past perfect tense. I had eaten the sandwich before going to work, right? The past perfect tense tells us about an action that happens before another action in the past. So while you're thinking about creating these past participles, if you want to kind of test your understanding of whether or not it's the right, right ending, en, nt, so on and so forth, put that have or had before it, stick it in a sentence and see if it works out. You wouldn't say, I had ate a sandwich, right? You would say, I had eaten a sandwich. And so that's just one of those little tests that you can use to make sure that you're choosing the right conjugation, in this case, of the verb to turn it into that past participle. Again, if this was confusing, rewind the video, listen to it again. I hope I made sense to you. If I didn't, make sure you write down those questions, and then when you come to class tomorrow, I'll be more than happy to expand on it. Okay, so let's get a little practice in, shall we? So we're going to have a series of regular verbs, and then we're going to take those verbs and change them into the present and the past participle. And if you're hearing any noise right now, it is my cat going crazy playing with his tether. Mr. Poe is a weirdo. So if you hear any sort of ambient noise, that's him going nuts. Okay. He needs attention, I think. So let's look at our first verb here. Our first verb is play. Well, this is one of the ones we've been talking about today, right? So let's take that verb and let's change it into the present participle, not tense, but let's just change it to present participle. So we know we take the verb and we add an ing, right? So if you were thinking playing, you got it. Okay. Now, let's think about the past participle. The past participle, again, is that past perfect tense. Let's use that had or have before to get it right. Did you say played? Of course you did. Because it's regular. It's easy cheesy, right? Play, played, makes sense. Let's do another one. All right, begin. All right. So we want to add that ing, beginning. All right, pretty simple. But let's do the past. The PAPP, the past participle. What do you think? Is it began or begun? Now you see how it gets tricky, right? Began, I began to walk. I begun to walk. I had began. I had begun. So again, we're going to use our past perfect test there. I had began or I had begun. Which do you think sounds correct? Sometimes we have to use our ear. Well, the answer is begun. Right? That's the past perfect tense. Began is the simple past tense. One, again, if you want to review, began tells us about an action that happened in the past. Begun tells us, with the auxiliary verb, tells us about an action that happens before another action. I had begun to pet my cat before he went nuts. And he's still kind of going nuts. Okay? So let's do another one. Break. All right. What's the present tense or the present participle of this? Breaking. I'm sure you've got these present participles down pat. But what about the past? Is it regular or would it be breaked? Probably not. I don't even like saying that. It just sounds so incorrect. Broken. Right? So here we have had broken. Again, that past perfect test. We have our past participle of break. Okay, so what are we doing with these past and present participles, right? We're not just throwing past and present participles into sentences. We're actually using them in phrases to combine multiple ideas in one sentence, okay? So before we get started with that, let's talk a little bit about the difference between a phrase and a clause. This year we're going to talk about independent clauses, subordinate clauses, and different kinds of phrases, participle phrases, infinitive phrases, gerund phrases, so on and so forth. But let's just start with something basic here. What is the difference between a phrase and a clause? The difference between these two is that a phrase does not have a subject-verb combination. A clause does have a subject-verb combination, okay? Whereas a clause will have an actor and an action. A phrase is just a group of words. It's not a complete thought. It's just a group of words, okay? So this is one of the tests that you can use to determine whether or not that little added thing in a sentence is a phrase or a clause, okay? We'll get into the difference between subordinate and independent clauses a little later, but for right now, that's about as much as we want to cover. So if you're thinking about this, a participle phrase is a group of words, we've got the definition there in bold, started with a participle that describes a noun or pronoun. As we said, earlier in the video, that participles were actually used as adjectives. They were nouns, or verbs rather, that were changed into adjectives to describe. Well, if you know anything about grammar, parts of speech, you know that adjectives always describe nouns or pronouns, right? Whereas adverbs describe verbs, adverbs, and adjectives. Adjectives always describe nouns and pronouns. So take these multiple definitions. A participle is a verb changed to an adjective. A phrase is a group of words, and that together becomes an adjective. It's a phrase started with a participle that describes the noun immediately next to it. Okay? All right. I hope that made sense. We're going to look at some examples, and I think it'll make sense as we work through it. So let's look at our example at the bottom. Playing a game of golf, Tyrone enjoyed the splendid weather. Okay? It's been really hot here recently, not splendid. So I'm kind of thinking about an ideal situation here, a game of golf when it's nice and rainy the day before and the temperatures are good. It's been really hot this summer. I hope you're watching this in good temperatures too. So here we have a sentence that combines two ideas, right? We know that Tyrone was playing golf. We know he's enjoying the splendid weather. Two different ideas. We want to combine those together into one sentence. Playing a game of golf is not a complete idea. Who's the actor here? Doesn't have an actor. Where's the verb? Doesn't have a verb, right? Because remember, the play becomes the participle. So here we have just a group of words. But these group of words describe Tyrone. Remember, participles describe the participation of the actor, of the noun, in an action. So in this case, playing golf is the action that's being described as being participated by Tyrone. Now, again, that sounded kind of strange there. But Tyrone is participating in the action of playing golf. We want to tell our audience that's describing Tyrone, his action, right, while he's enjoying, which is the verb, the splendid weather. So here we have two sentences, really, that we've combined into one using, in this case, the present participle of playing with the phrase, a game of golf, with the main clause, the independent clause, Tyrone enjoyed the splendid weather. All right. Now, these are a lot easier. I hope I didn't make it more difficult than it really is, but these really are pretty simple to put together with the present participle phrase. Okay, so let's talk about punctuation. As you noticed in the previous sentence, the present participle phrase starts the sentence, and it's right next to the noun that modifies, Tyrone. But to tell our audience that the phrase is different from the sentence, we have to add that little comma after the phrase, between the phrase and the noun modifies. Okay, so that's our first bullet here. Anytime a present participle phrase or a past participle phrase starts a sentence, you always end that phrase with a comma before going to the rest of the sentence, okay? So eating a sandwich, comma, I read the paper, okay? So I'm separating the phrase from the clause with a comma. Anytime that participle phrase starts a sentence, that phrase always ends with a comma. All right, pretty simple. Now let's get into something a little bit more difficult. What if the phrase, or the participle phrase, does not start the sentence? If it doesn't start the sentence, it's still going to be right next to the noun or pronoun it modifies. Yeah? But our usage of commas depends on whether or not that phrase is essential or not essential. Let me explain what that means. When a phrase is non-essential, it means that you can take that phrase out of the sentence and the sentence still makes sense. Okay? The actor is still identified. The action still makes sense. Everything that you need to understand who the actor is and what the action is right there in the sentence. If you take that phrase out and the sentence doesn't make sense, as much sense, we don't know who the person is, right? What kind? Which one? Those questions that those participles answer. If that's an essential question and an essential answer, then the phrase is essential. Okay? So non-essential, Not necessary to understand the actor and the action. Essential is necessary to understand the actor and the action, the what kind and the which one.